leave your country, your people, and your household, and go to a land I will show you.
You likely know the story. It is one of the most familiar in our faith history. The Israelites, who were at that time living in Egypt, had grown so large in number that the king began to see them as a threat. To control them, he forced the Israelites into slavery, where they spent their days in harsh conditions performing hard labor. Their taskmasters were brutal, and the Israelites' lives became miserable and bitter. Making matters worse, the king ordered that every male child that was born to an Israelite woman had to be killed. It is here that the story of Moses begins. Born under the threat of death, his mother hid him for the first 3 months of his life. When she could hide him no more, she set him in a basket made of reeds and floated him down the Nile River toward the place where Pharaoh's daughter was bathing. Pharaoh's daughter saw the basket and took pity on the child, adopting him as her son. And so Moses was raised in the house of Pharaoh, the very man who was oppressing the Israelites. One day, after he had grown up, Moses went out to where his people were being forced into hard labor. While watching what was happening, he saw an Egyptian man beating an Israelite man. Moses' anger rose up in him to the point that he struck the Egyptian, killing him. Fearing for his life, Moses fled to the land of Midian, where he ended up living with a priest and his family. In time, he would marry one of the priest's daughters, a woman named Zipporah. One day, while tending the flock of his father-in-law, Moses saw a bush that was burning, but was not being consumed by the flames. As he approached, the voice of God spoke to Moses from within the bush. God called Moses to go back to Egypt and free the Israelites from their slavery. As part of that call, God also said these words, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey." The Israelites would eventually reach that promised land, but getting there would not be easy. The journey began with a series of plagues designed to soften Pharaoh's heart, the final one being the Great Passover, where God struck down the firstborn of every Egyptian household. After that, the Israelites fled for their lives. With the Egyptian army close behind, they were trapped at the Red Sea, which God parted so they could escape. From there, they would journey 40 years through some of the most unforgiving terrain while experiencing some of the greatest hardships and challenges imaginable. But eventually, they made it through and found themselves at the Jordan River. The land that God had promised them was just on the other side. As they camped, Moses climbed a mountain, and God showed him the entire promised land, and it was beautiful. Then the Lord said to Moses, "This is the land that I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when I said, I will give it to your descendants." Moses was so close to realizing that promise when one of the most surprising things happens. Check out what God said next. "I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over it." And Moses died within sight of the goal he had worked so hard to achieve. No matter how many times I read this story, it always leaves me a bit shocked. After all that Moses had done to get his people there, he was not allowed to enter the promised land. He gets to see it. God shows them how amazing it is, but then God says, you don't get to go. And Moses isn't the only one. Out of all the people who left Egypt, and there were a lot of them, only 2 of the original group make it into the promised land, a guy named Caleb and a guy named Joshua. Yet when we talk about this story, we always say the people of Israel made it to the promised land. We see the Exodus as a success story, one of God's greatest achievements, and it is one of our faith tradition's most important stories of deliverance. But it was only experienced by the generation after the ones who paid so much of the cost in getting there. In a lot of ways, this can sound unfair. And yet, it is in this story that we learn a lot about what success is supposed to look like when it comes to our faith. Bottom line, in the Bible, true success is not about one person. It is about the entirety of a people, and not just the people who are currently living and breathing, but the people who will come after them. In essence, an entire generation of people pay the price of admission to the promised land for a people who were never enslaved to begin with. While that reality can seem a bit unfair, when I look at the story of the Exodus through the lens of being a parent, it makes a lot more sense. Carrie and I want the very best for our children. And as parents, much of our hard work is not for our gain. It is for the gain of our sons, Ethan and Graham. There are few things we wouldn't do to give them a great start in life. And our hope for them is that they will have it better than us. That they will, in a sense, live in a land filled with more milk and honey than we do. And while part of my reaction to when Moses and where Moses dies includes a sense of unfairness, in a lot of ways, one of my biggest hopes is that I will be given the opportunity that God gave him. Just let me see the land that they will inhabit. Let me know they have arrived. Let me know they will be okay. I will die a happy man and a happy dad if I see my children enter the promised land of a future better than mine, even if it comes with great sacrifice. My guess is that I am not alone in this parental hope. It was the hope of my parents, and it was the hope of the generations before them. This is a picture of my great-grandfather's church in Sweden. All of my maternal ancestry is 100% Swedish. They immigrated to the U.S. in the late 1800s. Over the past decade, I have learned how desperate their lives were before they moved here. They weren't just struggling to have a good life. They were struggling to survive. With no other option, they left the homes, families, and communities they loved and came here in search of a better future. But that future was not just for them. It was for their children and their grandchildren. In a lot of ways, I am living in the promised land that my ancestors set out to find. They didn't make it in the way that I have. I think they saw it. I think they knew it was coming, but they didn't live into it as much as I have. I grew up playing sports, eating full meals, going to school. They grew up working the fields, struggling to stock their pantry, and leaving the home they loved less out of a sense of hope than out of a last breath desperation. I live the life I have in large part because they walked through the wilderness. On that kind of personal level, the story of how the Exodus ends begins to make more sense. On a personal level, we understand that if we don't make it all the way to the promised land we have in mind for our families, that doesn't mean that our hard work is in vain. We know it is worth every effort. But as you start to broaden that idea out beyond family, it starts to get a bit trickier. And we may even wonder, where do you draw the line between my effort and your gain? That is certainly a topic that has garnered the attention of the politics of our day. And I imagine there are many varied opinions among us about that topic. But I want to focus on something that I think, at least I hope, we can all agree. And that is about the promised land of our faith community. In the same way that I want to build a better life for my children and those who come after them, I want to build a better church, a better faith community for those who come after me. It is a big reason I decided to answer the call to ministry. My faith has saved my life in ways I cannot describe. From the time I was a young child, the church has given me gifts I could never repay. The church helped raise me. The church shaped and formed me. The church supported me and my family in times of struggle. The church has given me the very best of friends and the very deepest of meaningful relationships. All of that was possible for me because of the generations who came before me in the church. Those who taught, preached, served, gave, struggled, and worked, not merely for their gain, but for mine and for yours. In that same way, Middletown Christian Church is what it is today because a group of people came together in 1836 to build a church that would change lives and impact our community. They dreamt of a promised land of faith that would benefit people well beyond themselves. And that dream has been realized in ways that most of them could never have imagined. We are here today because they knew the church and our faith was not just about them. They knew they were part of a bigger picture. They knew that even if they never saw the full reality of their dream, that didn't mean their work was in vain. Just as I am grateful for the effort and hard work of my familial ancestors, I am grateful for the effort and hard work of my faith ancestors, particularly those of this congregation. Now it is our time to return the favor. Look, I know how important it is for the church to meet our needs right here and right now. I get that. And we are working on being the very best church we can be for everyone who walks through our doors and everyone that our ministry impacts beyond our doors. But as much as I want this to be a great church for you and for me, I want something so much more than that. I want Middletown Christian Church to be an even stronger presence for those who come after us, for those we haven't even met yet. My greatest hope as your pastor is that when I spend my last day here, and I hope that day is a long time from now, but when that day comes, I hope that I will be able to catch a glimpse of the promised land that we are building together, that I will see a church even more beautiful, more loving, and more passionate for Christ, and more invested in making this world a better place than we are now. Don't get me wrong, I love who we are now. And I think we are a great church. But I know that God isn't done with us yet, and I believe that God has great purpose for our church, not just now, but for generations to come. But there is only so much God can do to get us there. Like the generations before us, the future of our church, the future of our faith depends on the work we do to build a legacy for those who come after us. But to get there, we must learn from those who have come before us. We must remember that as much as the church has done for us, as much as faith has done for us, as much as God has done for us, this isn't just about us. And so we can't make it all about us. The journey toward the promised land that God has in mind for this church may require some sacrifice. It may mean making some hard decisions. And it may mean we have to stretch ourselves a bit. We may even have to let go of some things we really like to get where we need to be. Now, don't get me wrong. We aren't going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so I don't want you to feel anxious. But there might be some sacred cows that need to be turned into sacred burgers. There may even be times we feel like we are walking through the wilderness. But if we trust God to lead us, this church will get to its next promised land. Over the next few weeks, we are going to look at some stories in Scripture that can serve as a guide for our journey. Stories that can show us how to navigate a rapidly changing world in ways that will affect our faith and will allow our church to continue to grow. For some of us, these stories will affirm what we've thought for some time. For others, they may be more of a challenge. My hope for all of us is that they would help us begin the journey toward finding the promised land that God has in store for the future church, even if many of us never fully realize or see its beauty. Amen.